Well, hello everybody. This is Sarah Colata with Architecture Talk Tongue. Super excited today because I have Sean Joyner. Joyner, is that how you pronounce your name,
Yeah,
Sean?
Joyner. Yeah, you got it. Yeah, Joyner. Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, everyone.
It just sounds so French. I almost want to give it like a French accent.
I do think the origins of joiner is French, and it means like a joiner, like a craftsman, like wood
Right.
joinery. And so that's kind of where it comes from.
Well, how amazing that you're obviously in architecture and your surname is like anciently related
Yeah.
as to it.
Yeah. It's a coincidence. It's a coincidence. Or maybe
I
it's
love
not. Who
it.
knows? Yeah.
Maybe it was written in the stars.
Yes. Yes.
Um, Yeah, so anyway, I'm so excited to have you as a guest today on the podcast. Obviously, you are an architecture writer. You've been writing for so many amazing magazines, and your career has been, you've been around for ages, and I have followed your work for quite some time, and I find your writing so compelling. And I'm excited to be able to talk a little bit about your career and inspiration. So maybe let's just deep dive right into it and tell me a little bit more about like why architecture in the first place. How did that journey start for you?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first, thanks for having me, Sarah. Looking forward to talking with you. And I always love talking about writing, so I'm looking forward to that too. Um, yeah, I think. Well, I started off with architecture kind of randomly, and I think I've shared this before. But I never, like when I was a kid, I never had like a dream of like, oh, I want to be an architect and stuff. It was really like around when I was 18 and I was trying to figure out the best thing to do in high school because my initial plan was to be a jazz musician. And then I was playing in jazz band in high school and I wanted to do that. But then I met my wife while we're just dating in high school, and I just started thinking of having a family. I was like, I don't know if like being a bass player is going to be the most sustainable way to like support a household. Um, but I also read a lot and I had a lot of different interests, and I didn't think like studying just music was going to be able to fulfill that. Um, and so I just kind of randomly thought, oh, maybe architecture will allow me to explore like the arts and the sciences and psychology and people and society and community and like all these things that I was reading about. I thought maybe architecture would let me do it. And so I was just like, I'll randomly take a class in architecture was kind of how it happened. And then I took the class and I was like, I really like this. And then I got more into it. And then, they say the rest is history kind of thing. And I started at College of the Canyons, which was a community college here where I live, and was there for 2 years and learned a lot. And then I went to Woodbury University and got my BArch, my Bachelor of Architecture. And after that, I worked in firms for a while. And the firms that for about, I think it was like 3, 4 years, like about 4 years, I was working in firms as a designer. Um, and the firms that I worked at specialized in education projects, so like schools, so like K through 12, and then later on, like higher education, like colleges. Um, but I started to realize that I didn't like working at firms. Like I hated doing construction documents. I didn't like just a lot of the things that went into having to do the drawings and having to like do the construction administration, the day-to-day things. I just like hated it. I didn't like it at all. I loved meeting with the client in the beginning of the project. I loved talking about the vision and doing like schematic design and even design development and coming up with the concept and everything. But once it got to construction documents and just, yeah, it just wasn't for me. So in when I worked in firms, I always did writing for the firms. And then, so basically after 4 years, my wife and I talked and we just said, hey, look, I've always had this lifelong dream of being a writer. I wrote in college, I wrote in high school for the newspaper. I would do like writing contests. And so I was always writing. And so we just decided, look, I'm just going to try to be a writer full time. And then that's
Yeah.
when I reached out to the director at Archinect and kind of started doing the writing.
So Archinect was your first official writing job in architecture?
Yeah. So I was working at a firm at the time, and I think on LinkedIn I messaged Paul Petrunia. He's the director at Archinect, But before I did that, I already had written a bunch of stuff. Like I was writing on like Medium, and like I was just kind of always writing things. And I had my own website, but I deleted it, and I was just trying to figure out what to do as a writer. But before I reached out to Paul, for like 2 months, I basically like read a bunch of stuff on Archinect, and then I was talking to a bunch of colleagues, and I wrote like 3 posts that I thought he would really like. And then when I reached out to him, because I wanted to be able to like send him a link to something that he would think like, oh, this should be an Archinect maybe. And so I reached out to him, and he's busy, so I didn't really get a response for a long time. But then finally he was like, hey, Sean, he was really nice. He was like, hey, fill this out. And we were talking. And it was to like, I had initially reached out for Freelance. And then when he responded to me, I just asked him, hey, what about being like a staff writer? Like, I totally understand, you don't know me, but I just thought I'd ask. And I was like, I know you guys are in Pasadena. I work in Pasadena right now. So that worked out because my office for the firm was in Pasadena, and so was the Archinect office. So I was like, yeah, but I was like, no pressure, you don't know me and everything. But then he was like, yeah, let's meet for coffee and talk about it. And so I met him. And then it kind of, I think things just worked out. And so I freelanced for Archinect for like 6 months or 7 months before I became like a full-time staff editor and writer. So that was my very first writing like official title writing job.
Mm-hmm.
And I was there for like 2 years, and now I'm doing more freelance. I just transitioned in February of this year from there.
Amazing. So now you're writing privately for different firms, or how does the freelance look like?
Yeah. So I mean, I'm finishing up a piece for Archinect right now. It's funny, actually. One of I won't give too much detail on it, but the piece that I'm working on, you interviewed Kevin Sherrod, right, from Gensler, and so it's kind of he's one of the subjects of like this story that I'm working on, which I think is interesting. But yeah, so I'm finishing up a piece for Archinect, and then there's some you'll see because I'm kind of in discussions with editors at other magazines, but until I have that piece there, I'm not gonna. But some other magazines I'm working on too.
Awesome.
But like so definitely Archinect with like online architecture writing. I really like Archinect's vision and everything, and still plan on as much as it works out with their vision and what they're trying to achieve, want to write for them. Because I just like the format and the audience and the platform. But I'm also now trying to work on print, getting into like print magazines, and those are the other ones that I'm talking to and trying to work out. So that's kind of it. I'm basically seeing kind of where things go. But when I was on the staff at Archinect, it was a lot of volume. Like when I was there, I wrote like over like 800 pieces, in 2 years. So it's just a lot of volume, which is fine. But now I'm wanting to write a lot less and more in depth, and like spending a lot of time on one piece and really crafting it to be like something notable, so that maybe down the road I could maybe start working on projects where I can spend like 3 months, like, following someone around or something to like write a really long, like 7,000 word story or something, So that's all long stuff though.
So moving more into like this sort of journalistic almost experience.
Yeah. Like I think like I'm really into narrative nonfiction, if you know, or like some people might call it like literary nonfiction. And that just takes a lot of. It's tough unless you're working for like the Atlantic or the New Yorker or something, for a business to be able to pay a writer for 6 months to work on one thing, like it's not really sustainable so like to me, I feel like being able to do my stuff at Woodbury and have that like support me financially, and then I can just use my free time to just work on a piece that I want, and then ask different people, hey, does this fit with you're trying to do with your editorial? And that way I get to publish something that I'm like, this is the absolute best that I can do right now while I'm working on it. So something like that.
So tell me a little bit, how does a life of an architectural writer look like? You obviously mentioned some that, there was big volume when you worked for the magazine, things like that. But but I can imagine that there's a lot of reading as well and research involved before you create a piece. It must be quite an interesting process to deep dive into new topics all the time as well. And
I don't know. I'll just talk about what it's like for me, because I think some of what I tried to do when I started working at Archinect was write pieces that I wish I had seen, because I didn't really see the type of pieces that I was writing. Yeah. So for me, yes, it's like a lot of like reading is a very big. I mean, I'm in my library right now, but like reading is like every day for me. Like that's a very normal thing. Reading, annotating, taking notes, and like that's a big part of my process. I really like to, which you could say like connect analogous worlds. Like so, like some of my pieces from Archinect like might talk about, a jazz bass player, but connect that to architectural design. Mm-hmm. Or talk about like in one of my, and I think in that same piece with the jazz bass player, I talked about the guy who discovered reinforced concrete, who was this gardener who was getting frustrated because his ceramic pots kept breaking. And so he got wire and basically discovered reinforced concrete, and then he made it a building material and all this stuff. But like, to me, that's interesting. And that comes from just constantly reading, really trying to learn what's being read, reading different topics. Like I don't really read a lot of architecture books. And so in certain discussions, sometimes people will bring up maybe certain architecture books that like everyone's supposed to have read, but then I'm just like, oh, I don't know. Yeah, but if you want to talk about Benjamin Franklin, we can, you can do that. So like, so for me, yeah, so it's a lot of reading, a lot of journaling. Like I journal every day, just thinking of ideas. But for me, it's not work. Like that's just a normal part of my life. Like that's always been a normal part of my life. And I think that's maybe why, like, I feel like if I tried to be a writer, like right out of high school, like I am now, like maybe of course I would have written something, but I don't know if it would be the same as now. I'm almost 30. Of all the years of just reading and just, being in architecture school and observing. I mean, I think that's a big part for me, that's important about being a writer, is like when I'm sitting in a jury, like really like what's happening in this jury during this review, like that student's crying. Why are they crying? Like, what's the dynamic of the panelists, are they trying to impress each other? Are they really trying to help the student? Maybe yes, maybe no. That's interesting. Maybe I could just explore that idea in an article or an essay. Mm-hmm. Why is everybody so nervous to present their work in front of a jury, but they're not nervous when they're presenting it during class? Mm-hmm. Like, it'd be interesting to explore the psychology behind that. And so, yeah, that's kind of like, it's always asking those questions. Like, why is so-and-so doing that? Why is this happening? Why is that happening? Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah, that's kind of, so it's like looking at the world, asking a lot of questions, I think, having a lot of conversations with people, because obviously I want to write things that people feel like, yes, this is like, that's exactly what's happening to me. Or mm-hmm. I just never could put like, I hope that people can read things and be like, that's exactly what's been happening. I never could put words to it, but like, it makes sense now, and I think that comes from like listening to people, talking to people, being really interested in other people. Yeah, I think that's how to answer it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's really interesting because it sounds to me that, and I think that architecture has that element to it as well, where you can actually just go out and explore and really connect almost everything that's happening on the outside, all the emotions, all the different experiences together somehow to architecture. And I think that writing has that component in it too. And it just reminds me of, I recently was listening to a bunch of talks from Architects of Architecture. And there was a talk by one architect who said that very soon after they like released their building, the usage of the building and even the clients changed certain things about it. So it like at an instant changed to what it was meant to be in the initial idea of the building creation. And that essentially only the book and the written word was able to keep that notion of what this idea was from the very beginning. And so somehow like the writing it can even almost bypass architecture and the architectural experience, because obviously architecture is always exposed to the outside world and so much interpretation and so much different uses and you know, a lot of different factors. However, the words, they are almost like they can stay there forever, and there's this like poetic aspect to it as well. And I think that on one hand we have this way in which we can connect almost everything to architecture and like experiential aspects of it, and the other one, it's like this aspect of it being somehow like forever, you know.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. I love writing. You probably know, because you mentioned to me that you read some of my blog as well. I think that writing is just a great way to also like express ideas, but give value to people as well. And like, I really enjoy the process of like researching into it, because I've always learned something new, and I'm sure that alone is a great journey as well.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, for me, I think that's what, you know, I think that there's with architecture writing, you know, if we want to call it that, there's like architectural criticism where people are like critiquing a building or like talking about the kind of formal aspect of the architecture. But then I think that there are like essays or like narratives that you talk about. So like you were talking about this architect who said that when the users moved into the building, completely changed from what their vision was. And I think that that's actually interesting. Like, I think it's, you know, the architect is always going to have their press release and their concept and their presentation. And architects are really good at like just making their design seem like the best thing in the world. And that's how we should be, you know, or else we probably won't be that great at our jobs, or we won't be very successful. But I do think that it's interesting in architecture writing for an audience that's used to reading that kind of thing to look at, okay, this building, so and so designed this building, this is the concept, but what happened when the people moved into it? Like, how did they experience it? Like, did the intent of the person happen? And then to your question, so for me, a lot of my writing, I try to write it in a way where it's like, I don't actually know, I'm not actually telling you, the reader, anything. I'm not telling you that I have the right answer, I'm saying that, hey, these might work. I've been trying these things, or I've been thinking about this. And I might not say those exact words, but the presentation is like, hey, here's an interesting question. Let's explore it and investigate it in this essay. And at the end, there might not be an answer, but we will have thought about a few things. And then maybe you figure it out. You know, maybe you figure out your own answer. But you know, maybe I could have been maybe my piece, or I could have been a small part of the thought process for you on this question. And so for me, it's like I'm learning through it, and I'm reading and I'm figuring things out, because it's like I can't pretend like if I end up talking about sociology or anything, like there's always going to be someone who read more books or someone who has a PhD that knows more than me. So I'm not the expert writing. I'm just the writer trying to bring someone into a certain process. So yeah, I love exactly what you said. I love the discovery of new things, and I feel like as a writer, I can comfortably be in situations where I can just kind of be like not know anything. Like I don't have any obligation to know anything. It's like, you tell me. I don't know. I'm here to figure it out. I'm just a sponge. Like, you know, what does that word mean? Who's that project? I haven't read that book. Tell me about that. And there's no really like obligation to like be an expert or know something. I just need to communicate kind of what's going on to the reader.
Absolutely. And always growing in the process as well.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit about your teaching experience. You're invested in academia for many years now, and tell me a little bit more about this. I think that it's also a very gratifying process, and as you say, it influences your writing, and in return, I'm sure your writing also influences your teaching. So tell me a little bit about this experience and the relationship with students.
Yeah. Well, so I've only been like officially teaching for about a year.
Okay.
But before that, I did I was very engaged with students, but not officially like as a title. I was it's more like mentorship and advising and things like that. But from that came the opportunity to actually be an adjunct faculty person and teach a class. And then
Yeah.
that was very, yeah. So to your question, so I think in a way, and a lot of my earlier pieces at Archinect when I first started were written like to students. Like they're basically like the pieces I wrote about like finding a job and internships and like what happens after graduation. It's like those are all like they're not for like experienced professionals. Like
Mm.
they're all for recent graduates and students because like those are all the people that I was interacting with. Like in whether it was in a firm and like an entry level person came and like maybe they were working on a project with me and so I was mentoring them in the firm, and that was before writing. But there were certain themes that I noticed with um, recent graduates or people in school, people trying to transfer. Like they all kind of had the same kind of concerns about career or certain fears that I had too, like fears that obviously with experience, we, this too, that we learn like, oh, I don't have to be afraid of a contractor. Like they're just a human being. Okay, I can just talk, but
Yeah.
when you're a student, you think like, they're going to ask me like, what's the gauge of the screw right there on the spot. And I'm going to have to know how to draw a detailed freehand and like put it on and stamp, and it's like, that's not, so there are like things like that. And so that helped me with my early writing. But as a mentor and a teacher, I think that also helped me. Um, I don't know. Like, I think that there are certain approaches to teaching that I always viewed myself as a mentor more so than like an instructor. Like, hey, look, you're here to listen and learn. Don't have, like there are certain people, and that's fine. People have that style, and maybe I think maybe there's a place for that to be helpful, but I just never thought it was helpful to like be the like kind of hard ass teacher, like making people cry and being kind of mean. And so I always, from the beginning, I kind of went in like, okay, I don't want to be a pushover and be everybody's buddy, but like, how can I maybe connect in a different way? At Woodbury, I was fortunate to kind of design my own class. Like this last spring, I basically designed a class around writing. And so all of my students started blogs on Archinect and like wrote about, and I basically had them write about their past and write about, we have a very diverse community at Woodbury. So we have some students who are like Guatemalan or Japanese and stuff. And so they're writing about like their home life back in Guatemala and like the design of the home and like how it's different. And my whole point in that class was trying to teach them that you don't have to write like a PhD professor. You don't have to follow all of these. Am I freezing? No, I'm good. Okay. Yeah, you don't have to
No.
follow all of these rules and stuff that you learned in English class. Like those things are important. But like when you're writing online, we have to write excellently, right? I'm not saying write sloppy. You have to write excellently, but you can write in a way. You can to make a joke. You can say, "Hey, look, when my grandma used to make this dish, it was like it made me so happy." And then we had this window or something, or I don't know, like and the like one of my students, she wrote this piece about the homes in Guatemala and how they were designed and how it was about community and how the people would hang out outside and like how the bathroom was detached from the house and how that was like that, and it was about this social interaction, this different culture, but it was around this house and this piece of architecture. And so the point of that class was trying to help the students see that you have something to say. And we talked about like how to structure an argument, like how to critique something. Everybody in the class for some reason hates Le Corbusier, which I get. He's like kind of the scapegoat for everything these days. But in the class we talked about like how do we criticize, like what specifically don't you like about Le Corbusier? And then and someone, oh, like have you read his book? Oh, I haven't. Well, why don't you read his book and like what, like annotate the book, then write a piece critiquing it and reference, like say, hey, on this page and towards a new architecture, Corb says this. I think that's a problem because XYZ. And then maybe you tell a story about your past or something that goes into it. And then maybe you bring in some new outside research or book that you read. And suddenly you have like a really thoughtful argument in it. And so they all kind of, so for me, for teaching, it was not so much, hey, here are the NAB requirements for this class. And it was more, hey, I think that you guys are all really smart, and I don't think you actually realize what you can do and how you can engage now. And so maybe I can be a small part of like just unlocking some things for you that you can kind of run with to do with writing. Yeah. So for teaching, for me, it's always been mentorship and the class, like the class happens to be the medium that I can mentor. Yeah, because I don't really have any aspirations to be a career academic or professor or like have tenure or anything. Like my focus is really writing. But I love mentoring because I've been mentored and had such an impact on me. So if I can every now and then teach a class and be able to mentor, I think that that's what I want to do. So it might be different from someone who wants to be like a career academic and like, unlock something new in a field or maybe get published in a journal and, do some new research or something. But for me, it's more about the mentorship and helping that person feel like empowered for their future.
Absolutely. So I'm curious because you say that you've been doing it officially for a year, and obviously with the pandemic. How did you find that experience, especially with communication with students or managing the work remotely? Was it hard somehow? And what sort of things did you learn in the process?
Yeah, so I think in fall I taught studio, which was very difficult. I think teaching on Zoom Zoom. We use this thing called Ring Central, but it's like this subset of Zoom. And I found that very frustrating and challenging because, as with all of us who I just feel like the studio experience is really like, I don't want to say irreplaceable because, I just think that's kind of not being open-minded to other possibilities. And I'm starting with the negative and I'll tell you the positive after, but yeah, there's just like not being able to just get out tracing paper, put the students drawing on the table and draw on it, talk to them and hold the model up in my hand. And, like those kinds of things were difficult. And like I said before, for me, the really like the emotional aspect of teaching is important to me, like the connectivity with the student. And I just feel on a screen, it's not possible. Like it's different when you're in the physical space with someone and the energy to really understand what they're like. I can't see the student's body language as much. I can't, there's certain things maybe that I might not see that I think is important for me to pay attention to as an instructor. Maybe like if I'm with a student in person, it's easy for me to tell if they're super stressed out. Yeah. Maybe they're hiding it on their face, but I can tell, but on the screen, maybe, I just see their face. I don't know. And I don't know. I'm not able to treat that situation the way it should be treated. But more like technically, there were many tools that the school introduced that helped us. We used Concept Board. I don't know if you've heard of that, to do like pinups and stuff. And I do know for some students, like they felt they preferred that because some like with presentations and stuff, because they were able to they just felt more comfortable in their own space to present in front of people, or they didn't feel as intimidated like when it was time to have a review. And so, I feel for students like that. But as a teacher, yeah, I think it was more challenging than like convenient. With that said, I think if I had if someone gave me like $10,000 to buy every tool I needed, something to like some digital thing to draw with, like maybe multiple if I just could have like everything I wanted or like the right tools, I'm sure that I could have been a different experience. Maybe put a whiteboard behind me and just make the whole thing a classroom. If I was able to do something like that, I'm sure it could have been a different thing. So it was a learning curve. My seminar class was a little bit easier to teach because it's not as tactile as studio, and it was more discussion. And it was shorter because studio is like 5 hours, and the seminar is an hour. But yeah, I don't know if that's kind of giving you what you're looking for.
It's really interesting, actually. I think because obviously, it is very challenging not only to move into new modalities of teaching, but also this whole aspect of disconnection that brings. Because for example, with the seminar, I'm imagining if you had like a presentation to give, you would focus on your slides so much more so than the students are actually listening in. So you're just like aware that they're in the background, but you can't really interact with them the same way as you would if you actually were in like a lecture room with everyone. And I think that the knowledge gets passed on differently and also received differently, because at some point during the pandemic, I'm sure that a lot of students were just like done with, after a certain amount of hours, you just can't process more information coming from your laptop.
Yeah, totally.
So there's definitely those things that are an obstacle. But then on the other hand, I think that certainly, and especially that's when you organize yourself a little bit better with the modality. It's easier perhaps to like pass on knowledge that can be pre-recorded, or maybe just sort of kind of compressed to a shorter explanation time, and then giving one more one-on-one time and more kind of discussion time over Zoom where there is more interaction. And I've been doing a research into this topic, looking into that, because I find it interesting that obviously we live in this technological realm where so much happens online. And, you know, even your work with Archinect was all digital, right? It's a digital magazine. And so there's certain benefits to that, like how it is like borderless and everyone can access it within a minute, and information can travel via newsletters and subscription-based models and things like that. But also just being able to sort of tap into it at different time. So these are all bonuses. And I think that there is certainly a certain potential in online education to sort of move to that space where it's also borderless and timeless somehow. However, there is an aspect of losing that spontaneity that happens within studio culture, and that one-on-one experience of learning, not only from one another as peers, but also with your mentors, to sit down and sort of not lose that touch to emotion, or how how the actual project affects the learning, of the student. I think it's easier to see that when you're in an environment, like you mentioned, for 5 hours in the studio working together, than when you join on Skype or Zoom or whatever modality there's available today. So obviously there's all these different aspects to it. And I've been looking into this topic from a perspective of the fact that a lot of universities are now developing digital courses and looking into learning some faculty fully online. And there certainly are already universities within the US that do Masters of Architecture online. And in fact, I have interviewed on my channel, also under the same Architecture Talk Tank, Architecture Education series, where we talk about those things, because it is extremely interesting how digital transformation is transforming ways in which we practice or learn architecture and interact with each other. On one hand, we're sitting here, you're in the US, I'm in Europe, and we're having this conversation live. And on the other hand, people can access knowledge and education, obviously, from their home environment. So that has potential, but it also brings in disconnection and more issues, a little bit like with social media.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's I mean, I'm the type of person who takes a lot of online courses, like personally. I mean, and I'm not trying to pursue a degree, but I found tremendous value. Whether like way back, I did like stuff on like coding that was like very applicable, and I could see growth. I've done a lot of like writing type workshops, and there would be kind of periodic meetups, but it was mostly like kind of self-guided. And yeah, it's just like a ton, like I've just a ton of online education stuff, and I've always found that helpful for me. I do think, I don't know if you're looking at this in your research, I do think it's interesting how certain personalities like match up with that kind of learning. Like I do think that there's certain types of people who are better suited to guide themselves and don't need to have, that can be self-guided. I think like that can be motivated and self-guided without a classmate or without a teacher there, and just be like, I want to learn this thing, whatever it takes. This is all I need. Because sometimes I prefer that. Like sometimes I feel like, whether I'm moving slower or if I'm want to move faster, I think that online education gives me that option of like, hey, look, I can, maybe so and so needs like 8 weeks, but I can wrap this up in a month, because I'm just really getting it this time, and I can move on to the next thing rather than I have to sit around for 16 weeks when I feel like I want to move on. But I think it's possible, and I mean, I think this could be a whole conversation in itself about like the ins and outs of the kind of social implications of online education with architecture specifically, because I'm really curious. I know we featured someone, maybe you interviewed the person, I forgot the name of the school. It started with an L, I think, that has the masters, the fully online accredited masters of architecture. I think it's in the US.
Yeah, but one is Pennsylvania State, and then the other one was Boston College of Architecture.
Yeah.
Both of those have.
Yeah, so I would actually like
also.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, for me, like if I was like, let's say if I was gonna write a piece on this, like I would be really curious to like find their graduates and see what the graduates are doing and like how life has been for them. Because that would sell me if I found like 5 or like 10 graduates that are like, yeah, no, yeah, if I felt prepared, I actually felt like I understood this better than my peers or something. I'm in this firm now doing, then I would be like, it works. Yeah, there's proof, there's proof right there, versus like maybe theories and stuff, like having hey, here's the graduate, they did full online education, maybe they went to campus 2-3 days and they're doing great. And so it works. That can be done,
Yeah. But I find it really interesting how you mentioned actually personalities. And I think that it really applies, because certainly I find myself be the type of person I like to dive into my own research, my own topics, and I can be very effective with, managing my time and also the overload of information that there is online, for example. So to me personally, the idea of learning online is extremely attractive, because that means that I can manage it around my day, run a business, maybe do my evening education with time, get a degree. And this is really appealing to obviously mature students, people that are perhaps already so invested in their career that they don't really see themselves leaving everything behind and starting a full-time education in campus, moving to, I don't know, another state or another city.
Yeah.
Do the education, and also investing heaps and heaps of money into this, So there is definitely that side of things that seems very attractive somehow, and being able to connect on like a 45-minute call with your mentor who gives you some pointers towards your dissertation or your research study, and then you're free to go. So there is something very attractive in that. But obviously there is various different characters, different personalities, and also I think people at different stages. I think that perhaps entry-level students would probably find it harder to find a right balance between, research and creative work, as well as the sort of working online, than more mature students that maybe are working on more theoretical topics. So in architecture, there's a huge aspect of like practical and how to deal with that as well.
Yeah, completely agree. Look, I've considered maybe doing a graduate degree, and the only types of programs that are appealing to me are exactly what you said. Like I want like anything where I have to be full time or I have to be on a schedule or in a class, like at least for this point in my life, like being a father, husband, I'm doing writing, I'm doing a lot of things. It's not possible. And I don't feel like I have to do that. It'd be great to like, hey, on Friday mornings and, Monday afternoons we meet or something. And then, maybe you talk about what your goals are, and then you just are treated like an adult and go do what you need to do, and then come back and, let's talk about it. That's, I find that very attractive, just like you said. Yeah. So it's interesting. That would be an interesting component of the research not your research, but just in general, that
Mhm.
if someone has that information of like, how, whether it's personality types or whatever it is, but like how do aptitudes or age or like, are people who have started a career and our parents, perform differently than an 18-year-old who just graduated high school. I'm sure that probably exists somewhere. I'm sure someone's
Yeah.
done that.
And I mean, I think that a lot of sort of conclusions can be drawn from the way that the new sort of younger generations are actually dealing with digitalization in the first place, because with Instagram and all the sort of social media available, one can argue even that this spontaneity of, the learning experience that happens within this manual sort of setting of a studio culture where, you build a model, you bump into another student who's building a model, and you just got a new idea. That can also happen through Pinterest. It can happen through Instagram. It can happen, it can also happen spontaneously through research and through interaction online. So there is certainly this element to that also kind of accompanies younger generation, because I think that younger people just are easier. Like they're more natural with digitalization. I'm still the type of person that, I use my Instagram. Everything is sort of automated. I cannot pull out my Instagram when I'm eating or meeting my friends or I'm on holiday. I still, reporting back to the world about what's been just happening in my life. It's not in my nature. I'm more of a person who, like, experiences moments and then thinks about it.
That's good. That's good.
But obviously my brother, for example, is 10 years younger, and he's completely different, like completely differently wired to to how he experiences reality. So there's definitely that. But yeah, anyway, it was a great conversation. Just one last question. What would be your sort of advice to architects who are looking into writing or potentially fascinated by your journey as an architecture writer? What sort of advice would you give to like a younger self?
Yeah, I think I guess I'll go with most of I think what I've encountered from I think one of the interesting things about working at Archinect is like I would get like so many emails from people about like writing or, hey, like what should I do? And I think the biggest thing that I've noticed is like most of the time, not every time, but most of the time when I would ask the person, they might say, "Hey, Sean, I like your writing. I'm interested in writing. What does it take to get published on someplace or whatever?" And I would just say, "Oh, like, can you send me some of your writing?" And they'll just say, "Oh, I haven't written anything yet, or I don't have anything to send." And I've noticed that with a lot of people, is like the idea of getting a piece of writing published seems to be more interesting than actually writing and like working through an idea. And so my kind of piece of encouragement to people is if you want to write, is to, just like everyone for ages has said this, is to read a lot, but read like a writer. So like not like you're actively reading. I'm sure everyone's had the class in high school where you actively read and you annotate and you kind of go through that. But so read things that are interesting to you. And then like start writing things, and inevitably you'll probably hate what you write. Like I still, like when I first write something I absolutely hate it. And even things that are published now, I just like wish they could just disappear and no one would ever knew I wrote it. So that would be my feedback is, find a topic you're interested in, or even if you write something for like a group of friends, is just to write things, or start a blog and write it publicly. I think it's great to go on Medium or, Archinect. You can do a broad blog for free. You don't have to, there's no really barriers to just start it. And that's what I did, because for whatever reason, because Architect gets a ton of traffic. But when I wrote articles on Archinect, my stuff would always show up on the top of Google. So I was to get like a lot of feedback on it. And so I think it's good practicing your skills in front of an audience, because I think what ends up happening is like sometimes like early on, and and there's even things back, and I'm always getting better, but I really thought like the things that I wrote in like college were like so brilliant and stuff, and then someone would be like, "This doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. Where's your And I was just like, oh, I guess it's not that great, you know, but I wouldn't have known that if I was just kind of in my own head that I was this amazing writer and never shared it with anyone, never. But that helped me to be like, okay, I guess like, you know, I got to work on this.
Mm.
So I think it's good to like grow and learn in front of people. And like Medium allows you to say to text your friend, hey, check out my article, or text people and they can share it, or you can post it on your thing and say, hey, check out my article. Give me feedback. You know, hopefully, I think it's great to have people in your circle that will say, hey, man, look, this is really bad. This is, you know, this isn't
Yeah.
good. Like, you need to work on it to not just like not have people around you that just pat you on the back because you're their friend. So I hope that's encouraging. So yeah, I mean, it's like kind of make it more positive, is just write and see it as an experiment, see it as a journey, see it as you know, something that you'll forever until the day to your last day you'll be getting better at. Yeah, I think that's it.
And just one more thought that I sort of got from your answer now. What do you think about expert writing? It seems to be quite important, with specifically for architects to sort of position themselves with their expertise. It's topics that I've been exploring quite a lot with my writing and my sort of research into business positioning, content creation, and differentiation in the field of architecture. How do you make yourself different by writing expert, or writing or publishing or talking about expert research that basically makes you different? Any commentary on that from your perspective?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think my feedback on, because when I was in firms, I did like some writing like that. And for me personally, what I always felt like was missing, I always basically felt like if someone was talking about sustainability, like everybody like just like copy and pasted everybody. Like there was nothing fresh about it, nothing interesting about the piece. It was very corporate, like corporate seeming, or very like the way most, because usually it's firms like this doing this with thought leadership. Like, you know, like certain organizations will have like a thought leadership tab or something on their website, and there'll be a bunch of blogs from like the experts in the firm. So like the airport expert will write something on like airports or something.
Yeah.
And like that could be just like, I don't know, I would love to write something about an airport, but it wouldn't be like, I guess my commentary on it is like, I've never really felt that like just like brute factual statements or like research, like basically like, and this is a very Western thing. I know in America, I think maybe probably the same in Europe too, is that, and then this is kind of how we're taught in school, is that it's like, if we're just like have the perfect argument and like the perfect points, that like people will just get it and like do what we're saying, you know. And like I don't particularly, at least for me when I read, I don't particularly find that compelling. I think that writers need to like, I don't know, for me, I'm always trying to like turn a light bulb on in someone's head, or like, that's why I like using different, that's why I like in the beginning of a piece, and this is not like universal, every piece is different, but like in a piece where I'm trying to do something expository or like motivate someone, or maybe I'm talking about like dealing with like stressed out coworkers or something, like I want to start the piece off with, you know, some general statement where people are like, okay, cool, yeah, I know what I'm getting into. I'm reading about stressed out coworkers. I have stressed out coworkers and they're like really frustrating me. You know, what is Sean going to say? And then when I go into the piece, I either want to tell a really personal, transparent story about myself or someone else, or even something that seems completely unrelated, like something about like Theodore Roosevelt that seems completely unrelated. And then later on in the piece, I want to like present like a new idea or something new that connects to this unrelated story, because I feel like if it's, hopefully I'm making sense, because this is a really abstract kind of way I think about it. But I feel like if I make it fun to read, entertaining, the person can identify it. Maybe like something can be in there where they kind of laugh at themselves. They're like, oh yeah, I do that too. Like I snapped at this person and I got in trouble for it, and maybe I shouldn't have done that. And oh, this guy did it too, so it's fine. I'm not the only one, and maybe I can think of it this way this time. And so I guess my critique to most people is making, and I've made this mistake so many times. And I would hear about it from the people who would like email me like, "Hey, you don't know who do you think you are?" Um, but like making like broad, like unless I'm like a PhD or a psychologist or something, if I'm making like big statements about psychology or
Mm-hmm.
like broad statements about human nature and stuff, like it needs to be written in a way where the reader is like not going to argue with me or dispute it.
Mm-hmm.
So, some people do that through anecdote, like an anecdotal story, and say, "Hey, look, I was really upset." And sometimes we get upset. That's different than saying people get upset in these situations, you know.
Yeah.
Because like if I
Yeah.
say it like that, then people are just like, "Well, I don't. I mean, I'm no such. I don't get up." And then it's like it becomes this thing where I can't influence the reader. But
Mm-hmm.
if I make it anecdotal or if I say, "Hey, maybe if I'm talking about an architect, the architect got frustrated at this time or they had a difficult client, sometimes these types of clients appear. But if I say, hey, clients are difficult, and I start making like grand universal statements, like, I think that's where I personally don't connect. I start not to, I mean, I'm very argumentative already. I think that's just the nature of writers in general or people doing new content. But I immediately go to like, well, yeah, I mean, not all the time, that's not true. Or maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's true, is that making sense? So
That
I think
makes a lot of sense. I'm actually thinking about my own writing. I think I do that a lot.
I mean I mean I think that's why these kind of interactions are like so helpful because I think I've grown the most when like I had like a habits or something in my writing that I just obviously because I'm the one doing it over and over again I have no clue that I'm doing it and then some people are nice when they give me the feedback and some people are rude and mean. you know like when I
Mm-hmm.
first started at Archinect there were so many people like, hey, you're long-winded, you right, this could have been shorter, you're too young, you don't know what you're talking about, like a lot of stuff like that. And
Mm-hmm.
and obviously it's kind of hurtful, but like I always was just like, okay, I'm like, okay, they kind of do have a point. Like I have to take into account that like if they know if I'm in this context, it's clear that I'm not as experienced. So that was part of my strategy. It was like if I talk to architecture students and recent grads,
Mm-hmm.
um, I'm technically can talk to them from a position versus if I'm trying to talk to some person who's been an architect for like 40 years.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
so for that person, I'll tell it interesting. For anybody, I can tell like an entertaining story. So if I talk about um, maybe jazz and like that kind of thing. Like, maybe that person doesn't learn anything, but they're entertained by it. It's different. And then I would just like those little statements. I would start to just change little things that I would say it seems this way to me,
Mm-hmm.
or it appears that some situations happen this way, and like little changes like that. Then suddenly people aren't arguing with me and saying but that just comes from just practice and realizing because what we usually do is we read a book by an expert that's really compelling and speaks to us and then we go and try to write like them. That's what I've
Mm-hmm.
done. That's what I would do. Like I would read, like I love Robert Greene. I don't know if you know Robert Greene. um and like I would always read his books and other people and like they would say, hey, this, they would make those broad statements and stuff,
Yeah.
but they have like a 30-page bibliography of all their research, so like they can back it up. And then but then I would go write and say I'm going to write like Robert Greene and do that, and then people are like, what are you doing, man? Like so I just had to start to realize I'm not Robert Greene. I'm who I am. So what do I have to offer that people will say, hey, look, I want to listen to Sean about that, or maybe this piece has nothing to do with Sean, but he's just communicating something to me and making connections that I couldn't make. Like a lot of times I feel like my job as the writer is, hey, perhaps you've already made this connection and you don't even need to read this. This article is not for you. But if you haven't, maybe if you thought about this and that and like put it together and like considered this, maybe that might do something for you. I don't know, have a good day. Like that's kind of how I started to think about it. And so I'm kind of, I guess my expertise is providing an option of to think about something, but I'm not like promising anything or, and then of course when it comes to writing, like I feel comfortable telling people, like helping people, like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, look, if you maybe do an outline and not just sit there at a blank screen,
Yeah.
maybe you'll get further. Maybe you'll get further. Like I can say that from an expert position, maybe.
Yeah.
Um, But that's kind of a long answer. It's kind of complicated, I think. But that's the biggest thing. I'm always yawning when I read like expert type writing. Like who's someone I'm trying to think of, like people who do it really well. I can't think of it. Yeah, I can't think. I mean, maybe you and I can follow up and I can share.
Yeah, that would be great. I will put it in the comments below the video.
Yeah, because there's some people who like really that aren't necessarily. I mean, it's mostly like the self-help type people, like self-help authors.
Yeah.
So like Mark Maron, I think, or like Tim Ferriss kind of, but he does a lot of research. But there's certain people who aren't experts, but they're good at communicating research and like calling people to action. And I think they have, and it's a certain kind of style and it's a certain audience for that kind of thing. But they have a way of selling it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sorry if that's too long.
No, that's great. That's
Cool,
okay.
cool.
No, it's great. I'm actually I really like Tim Ferriss. I read this kind of stuff and definitely influenced myself a lot. And one of the approaches I took to my own writing is mostly to just base things on my own experiences. But of course not, especially when I write blogs, sometimes I try to voice them as advice. So that is a little bit of a different type of writing than, for example, when I put together the podcast where I share a lot of personal journeys. And the idea behind it really was to tell about all the fuck ups and about all the mistakes and the sort of experiences that were really kind of the turning point in my career, simply to kind of communicate the experience and then the lesson learned, and also to encourage people to look at certain maybe misfortunes differently, because we set ourselves with all these goals, and you're sharing that yourself, those kind of moments where people come in and they have their own opinion, or you're kind of going through that biggest learning of your career, and also realizing things that at the beginning of this conversation, you mentioned how you realized you actually didn't quite like doing CAD drawing and all this traditional architecture thing. And I had the same realization, and I only realized that when I went to do my first internship. And it was like, I kind of already felt a sense of failure then, because it was after 3 or 4 years of studying, because I did a foundation year in art before I actually went to do architecture. So it's like 4 years in, and you feel already you're invested so much into architecture. It's a part of you and it has to be you. And it's like defining your head. And out of a sudden, you don't find yourself being able to execute the basic requirement of that job, which is basically sit in front of the computer and design a house now.
Yeah.
I mean, how can I execute this work? How can I be an architect if I hate the way it gets delivered, And that was quite a big shock for me. And it definitely defined the way I made decisions further on. But, talking about these experiences, and of course, like, bold statements aside, I think it's really good point you made, and I'm certainly learning a lot in this conversation. But part of it is also like how you digested this information, what decisions you made, and to show that it's not the end of the world,
Right. Yeah. Like I think that like that exact approach, I think, and, certain like I have to listen to your podcast. I think I saw the podcast, but I thought it was the same thing as this, but it sounds like it's something different.
Yeah, it's actually
okay. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, the podcast alone is like my only piece of content, which is super personal. Like everything else I create, I have conversations with people, and it's always like very interactive. Whereas the podcast, it really goes into like my personal story, and then gives a lot of advice also. And it is a little bit more like an expert, advice in respect of positioning and client acquisition and things like that. Which comes from personal experiences, but also research that I did into these topics. And nice, I wanted
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, I wanted it to be like that. And I always write it. I always sit down and write the podcast before reading it out loud. So I don't flow with it, because it's important for me to think about how I will connect the stories to the outcome, and to like really kind of portray the value in each episode, and also kind of keep a structure of the episodes concise. So it's been an interesting project. I sort of took a break now over the summer, but I'm going to be starting with the second season soon. It is a continuation of what was created already. And I'm actually, with all the writing, I'm hoping to publish it in a book as well.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. That structure sounds like, for me, like that's a much more compelling structure. And that's, you know, other people might think differently, but I always feel like when the person, like when I hear the person's story, I'm like, man, like she went through this and like made this mistake, and I feel like I was on the verge of there, but now I don't have to go there because like I've learned this now, and like so I'm gonna like, for me, that I feel like that like when people understand, like I think like same thing with like, you know, we talked about Tim Ferriss, because we all know him, like we all listen to him for a reason, right? Like he and in his, I'm sure you've probably read the 4 Hour Work Week. I mean, he does a good job of telling his story. Like most people that write those kind of books tell, hey, I graduated college, I went to this job I hated, I wanted to make a change, you know, like they tell their story, so you're just like, I'm just like you, I'm you, and like you figured a way out, and so now and so I feel like that's a really kind of tried and true strategy. So yeah, I'll listen to that. That sounds interesting.
Thank you. That's amazing. Anyway, let's wrap it up. It's been an hour. Thank you so much for joining me. It was such an interesting conversation. And for everyone as well tuning in, thank you. It's great to see you guys. And subscribe to the YouTube channel for more of those topics. And as well, if you want to reach out to Sean, Sean is on LinkedIn under the name Sean Joyner. So you can just find Sean on LinkedIn and drop him a message. Right, Sean? You have a website or?
I don't have a website yet. I think, LinkedIn works, or, you know, or Archinect. You can see my stuff. I think it has a little contact thing.
Profile on Archinect. Sure.
Yeah. But eventually, I'll need to do or Twitter. You can do, I mean, you can search me and you'll find some stuff. But I think I need to do a website soon. Just haven't gotten around to it.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Sean. Thank you, everyone. And I'll see you all soon.
Oh, thanks, Sarah.